This one is from a favorite author of mine. His name is David Klass. And I'm pretty much everything that I have ever read by him is absolutely amazing, even when it's not a comedy. Losers Take All is a funny book. It's really funny. But he writes lots of other books like The Grandmaster and what's the other one? Stuck on Earth. All of them super super good. If you're looking for a great book to read, David Klass. It's not usually science fiction or fantasy. It's usually just drama of kids and people trying to do whatever they can to make it. So I'm gonna read the back of it here, and then we'll get started. For Jack Logan and his athletically ungifted teammates, it's all about the agony of victory and the thrill of defeat. There's a new rule at Jack Logan's Sports Crazy High School. All students must play on a team. So Jack and a group of anti-athletic friends decide to rebel. They create a third-string soccer team whose mission is to avoid victory at any cost. But as the team's losing formula becomes increasingly successful at attracting fans and attention, Jack and his teammates are winning in ways they never expected and don't know how to handle. So this is Losers Take All by David Klass. Here, give me just 1 second. I've got to type something out, and then we'll start. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Losers Take All by David Klass, Chapter 1. The scoreboard had been designed in Japan, and our town had bought it a year ago to record Fremont's glorious football victories and track triumphs. From the bleachers where I stood with 700 screaming students and 4,000 equally crazed town people, the giant live feed LED display and the half-dozen digital timers helped us follow all the action on the track far below. 20 runners, all 18-year-old, toned and ripped super athletes, had turned the final corner and were racing down the home stretch. And the 21st runner, a much older man but in terrific shape, was coasting along in the middle of the pack when he happened to glance up at the scoreboard. That 21st runner was Arthur Gentry, the principal of Fremont High for more than 40 years, and the man most responsible for making our school into a sports powerhouse known throughout the state of New Jersey as Muscles High. He was the kind of principal who liked to know everything that was going on in his school, so he was always poking his head into a classroom or chatting with a new student. But it would have been much better for all of us if he hadn't glanced up at that fancy scoreboard right then. The race was the climax of graduation week, which, at Fremont High, meant as much sports crap as they could cram into 5 days. It started off with Team Appreciation Day, a pep rally for teams that had already been appreciated so much it was hard to imagine the star players hadn't gone deaf from all the applause. Then came the new trophy ceremony, when the sacred glass case at our school's front entrance was unlocked and gleaming gold cups for the past year's championships were carefully slipped onto shelves next to tarnishing plaques from seasons gone by. And there was captain's coronation, when the new team captains for next year were crowned by the old ones and showered with confetti while cheerleaders danced around them. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. There's not much at Fremont High during graduation week to hold the valedictorian or the president of the French club. But if you happen to be an elite athlete, it's like getting a Viking funeral and entering Valhalla or being inducted into the Hall of Fame. Warning, this is not a typical story about the birth of a sports team dynasty, like when Babe Ruth joined the Yankees and belted out 54 home runs his first year, or when Vince Lombardi took over the Green Bay Packers and promised them, "You will never lose another championship." This sports story has little to do with blood, sweat, and tears and six-pack abs, but it has a lot to do with a dental disaster, fast legs, and bad hand-to-eye coordination, plus galloping on horseback at night with a pretty girl across a mafia-owned golf course, and learning how to make the principal of your high school so mad at you that he puts his fist through his door. I was not an elite athlete. I'd spent years searching for the sport I was best at and never quite found it. I was a chronic hitter of foul balls, a basketball player whose jump shot slalomed around the rim before deciding to hop down rather than slip through the hoop, and a wide receiver with plenty of speed, but iron hands that repelled footballs with an almost audible clank. I'm tall and slender. My dad says scrawny, and he'd been encouraging me to lift weights since I was 12. "Bulk up and it'll pay off across the board," he assured me. "Coaches will see it, girls will notice, and you'll be able to shovel our driveway faster." I told him thanks for the advice, and I know it worked for him and my two brothers, but I'd just as soon go my own way. And that was my attitude toward our sports-crazed school, too. Live and let live. Till that afternoon in June, when Principal Gentry glanced up at the scoreboard, and everything changed. I may sound angry, but the truth is I had nothing against pep rallies and cheerleaders dancing around the next year's captains. Did I think it was nutty? Well, sure. But I wasn't trying to fight back or rip anything down. I did my own thing. At my first 3 years at Fremont, I joined the computer club and kept my distance from the super jocks. Except for the fact that, by virtue of my last name, I'm one of the cornerstones of that sports culture. You can never get far away from your own name. Which brings me back to the grand finale of graduation week, Champions Day. The culmination of Champions Day for 50 years has been the senior mile run. The 20 fastest seniors race 4 laps around our track while the whole school and half the town cheers them on. The Fremont record for the mile is 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I know that time because the record was set by my father, Tom Logan, 27 years ago. Since fewer than a dozen high school runners in all of American track history have broken 4 minutes, it's a hell of an achievement to have been just 17 seconds over, especially for a big football player like my father was. It's not likely to ever be broken in our town, but every year the top 20 athletes at Muscles High take their best shot. That day, in early June, 21 runners were sprinting through the sunshine for the finish line. Battling out were 4 team captains, 2 hyper-athletic girls in orange lycra, 5 members of our track team, and a baseball star who had been drafted by the Yankees. But the runner drawing the most attention was old Principal Gentry, a schoolboy champion in his day, then a track letterman at Princeton, and now at 70, still a rail-thin specimen and a competitive runner. "Look at the old geezer go," my friend Frank grunted. "If he's not careful, he's going to keel over." "Have some respect," I told him. Let's see you do that when you're 70. I can't even do that at 17, Frank admitted. And you know what? I'm fine with that. When I'm 70, I plan to be on my back in a hammock eating sun chips. It's not hard to picture Frank with white hair swinging in a hammock, staring up at the clouds and popping sun chips. He's a gentle giant who loves to pig out on junk food and take long naps, and he avoids all physical exercise with a laziness that a sloth would envy. Principal Gentry was made of tougher stuff. He was clearly not going to win this race. Al Flynn, the center fielder headed to the Yankees, was neck and neck with Ramon Hernandez, the captain of the track team, for that honor. They had opened up a 20-yard lead over the rest of the field, and the crowd was roaring and stomping so that it felt like an earthquake was shaking the bleachers. Ramon put on a final spurt and crossed the finish line in 4 minutes and 31 seconds, with Al just an eyelash behind. The two gods of sport slapped five, and everyone gave them a cheer, and then all eyes swung back to our principal. These days, serious older runners compete in their own track meets, and there are records for every age group. Principal Gentry's best time was 12 seconds off the state record for 70-year-olds, and I don't think he intended to try to break the record that day. But 40 yards from the finish line, he glanced up at a digital display and saw that he was 7 seconds from the record. This was a man who had climbed Mount Kilimanjaro at 60 and scuba dived with hammerhead sharks when he turned 70, whose motto was, "Just go for it." The crowd began roaring again as Principal Gentry dug into his last reserves and sped up. His stride was fierce and determined as he churned down the home stretch, passing runners 50 years younger. I can still see his bony elbows pumping like pistons and the sunlight flashing off his sweaty forehead that was half lowered toward the finish line as if ready to break an invisible tape with the point of his nose. "Gentry! Gentry! Gentry!" the crowd chanted. He passed the captain of the basketball team, who broke stride to wave him on. I spotted my father lower down on the bleachers near the green turf, chanting, "Gentry! Gentry!" Dad is 6 feet 3 inches tall, and his thick head of black hair tossed in the spring breeze as he stood with his best friends, most of them old teammates from his high school days, and cheered and shook both fists. Dad watches lots of sports events live and on TV, and he often gets so personally involved with them that my mom and I have to tell him to calm down. 15 yards to go, Gentry was only 2 seconds off the record. He threw himself forward with guts and willpower, as if to set a shining example and say to each of us, "This is what you can achieve if you just lower your head and go for it." "Gentry! Gentry!" The bleachers felt like they were going to collapse at any second. I didn't shake a fist, but I did put my arms out to steady myself. On my left, my friend Dylan Sanders, who is usually far more critical of the jock culture at Fremont than I am, got caught up in the moment and started leaping up and down. It was impossible not to get excited. I found myself clapping and shouting. 5 yards to go. Principal Gentry hurled himself at the finish line with everything he had. He zipped across, nose first, right arm following as if throwing a punch at time itself. And then, his trim torso with his left arm trailing, he raised his arms and turned to the scoreboard and saw that he had missed the record by half a second. There was a loud, deflating sigh from the crowd, like the air hissing out of a hot air balloon. Principal Gentry put his hand dramatically on his heart, as if to say, "I gave it my all." The applause swelled, and then he went down on one knee as if saying a brief prayer to the Olympic gods, and the cheering got even louder because he looked so noble kneeling there, and he had come so close and fought so well. And then old Gentry toppled over onto the blue synthetic track that he had helped raise the money for, and the crowd went totally silent. "Oh my God," I whispered. The ambulance crew was tending to him in moments. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Frank whispered to me, sounding scared. "I swear I didn't." We were all scared, and I saw several people start to pray. "He'll get up in a second," I whispered back to Frank. He's probably just winded." But he didn't get back up. The sad fact is that he died right there in front of nearly 5,000 people, and a week later, they named the whole turf field and track after him, Gentry Field. There was even a proposal to bury him beneath it, but apparently they had to be abandoned for zoning reasons. Now, you'd think that Gentry's dramatic death might have given Fremont pause to say, maybe we've pushed this sports thing a little too far. maybe as a school, as a town, as a community, we owe it to our kids to take our foot off the gas and hit the brakes and emphasize reading and writing and algebra a little more and bicep curls a little less. But it didn't go down that way at all. Chapter 2. The surprise announcement was made at the school board meeting just 3 weeks after Gentry's death. It was very unexpected because there had been talk of a search for an educator from outside our community, a new principal with impressive scholarly credentials who could give our school a fresh look and feel. I wasn't at the meeting. I was spending most of my summer vacation hanging out with Dylan and Frank, playing video games or swimming in Hidden Lake, and most of my evenings at my miserable summer job bussing tables at Burger Central. But I heard the news right away because Dylan's mother is on the board and forces him to come to the meetings, and he had dragged Frank along. So my two friends were in the third row when the board president, Mr. Bryce, announced that they had not needed to search far. In fact, it seemed like they had just rolled over the nearest rock and scooped out the biggest and meanest critter that scampered out. When the meeting ended, Dylan and Frank texted me that they had a news flash, and they headed right over to Burger Central to try to score some free fries. Moldinger? I said, staring back at Dylan. You're kidding me. There was applause when they announced his name, Dylan reported. In fact, there was a spontaneous standing ovation. Everyone seems to think he's a brilliant choice. Brilliant? How? What qualifications does he have? I asked. He's a proven leader, Frank pointed out with his usual sarcasm. What about some fries, Jack? When I'm stressed out, I need to eat. Frank must be stressed out a lot because his eating habits resembled those of a great white shark. He seeks out food 24 hours a day, or at least every minute when he's awake, and it wouldn't surprise me if he occasionally took bites out of his pillow in his sleep. He would be fat if his growth spurt hadn't matched his appetite. When you're 6'5", you can carry extra 50 pounds like an overnight bag. Proven at what? I demanded. Just because he can win state championships in football doesn't mean he can run our school. And if you want fries, go order fries from Becca. I'm not in charge of handouts. I just wipe the tables, and I'm still trying to get over Moldinger. What the hell were they thinking? The word legacy came up several times, Dylan informed me. As in, we have to stay true to Gentry's legacy. And also the word tradition, as in, we have a long and glorious tradition to uphold here. And the news only gets worse, Jack, so a little snack might brighten things up. If we had the money for fries, we wouldn't need a friend, Frank pointed out. Just wander through the kitchen and slide some onto a napkin when no one is looking. We're all doomed, so we might as well have a last meal. I studied Dylan's face. How could any news be worse than Moldinger taking over our school? Becca was returning from a bathroom break and overheard my question as she walked past. She jolted to a stop and stared at us. Moldinger? She asked in shock and outrage. No freaking way. How is that possible? He's not even a teacher. He's just a big musclehead. He doesn't even have a neck. They can't do that to us. He's the worst kind of sports Nazi. It was true. Brian Moldinger, coach of the Fremont football team, chief of the audiovisual department, which made him a non-teaching member of the faculty, and now apparently the new czar of our high school, had a broad chest that seemed to be welded directly to his fat, bald head. It was as if the millions of pounds of weights he had pumped had reconfigured his body to eliminate all thin and weak areas. Becca's real last name was Knight, but everyone called her Becca the Brain because she was focused on school all the time and had never gotten less than an A on any test since third grade. I'd always admired her long legs and sharp sense of humor more than her GPA, but Becca didn't date or do anything that might waste precious time that she could spend studying. During the summer, she worked the computerized register at Burger Central, punching orders at hyperspeed and using slow periods to study impossible vocabulary words that might appear on the SAT. Neck or not, it's Principal Moldinger now, Frank explained, and you guys don't want to hear the really bad news. Becca looked at him. The football team is taking over the library as their new weights room? I think that's actually quite possible, Frank told her. But no, that's not the bold new policy Moldinger announced in his speech at the board meeting, the one that got him the standing ovation. Andy Shimsky, who waited tables, had heard enough to join our little group of social outcasts. He was a string bean of a kid with long, greasy black hair and wrists like toothpicks, and had been mercilessly bullied by jocks since middle school. What bold new policy? Shimsky demanded warily. There was a moment of ominous silence when Dylan and Frank exchanged looks, and Becca, Shimsky, and I waited for the bombshell to explode. In honor of Arthur Gentry's legacy, Dylan began, and to continue his unique vision of the Fremont High School scholar-athlete, Frank finished with in a mocking tone. Starting in September, all seniors will be required to join at least one school sports team and stay with it through an entire season. This will develop strong bodies along with keen minds and create a unifying school spirit that will keep alive the legacy of Arthur Gentry. But that's 3 hours of practice a day, Becca pointed out. Not to mention weekends and traveling to away games, I added. What if we're not good enough to make any of the teams? They're adding B teams and some C team options and expanding the rosters, Dylan said. I believe Arthur Gentry would tell you just go for it. Part of the new policy is no cuts because you happen to suck, Frank informed us. They'll keep you on the roster, one team or another, and make you practice off and sit on the bench. You can scrape mud off the cleats of the football stars or sponge sweat from the baseball court during halftime or relime the baseball diamond for the starters after the starter has kicked up dust and left. I guess the good news is that we all have important roles to play. They can't do this to us, Becca declared. They can't make me play a sport I hate. I already have my sport, show jumping. It's part of my story. Your story? I asked, trying not to stare too intensely at her extremely pretty hazel eyes. The one I'm going to tell about myself in my college application essay, she informed me like I was clueless. Perfect grades aren't enough these days. 20,000 applicants to the top schools have nearly perfect grades and test scores. You need a story to set you apart, and mine is about horses. Now I helped raise one named Shadow that had a damaged hind leg and nursed him back to health, and won ribbons riding him. I've already written the essay. It's called Knight and Shadow. I don't need another sport, and I can't afford to waste 3 hours a day on a stupid team I'll never play for. It's not as if Moldinger's offering you a choice, Dylan told her. There's always a choice, Skimshy announced, sounding like he was preparing to lead a revolution. He had suffered a lot, getting beat up all the time. In 6th grade, his nose had been broken by a creep who rammed his face into a garbage can. Our town had its tough side. The jocks rule, and if you don't show them respect, you pay. It had made Shimsky tough and crafty in his loner way. Whenever there's a rule, there's a way around it. Not this rule, Dylan said. It's about legacy and tradition. The school board confirmed the new policy. My mom was the only no vote. Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines and get ready to suffer. The lunatics have taken over the asylum and we're at their mercy. We're all dead meat, Frank agreed. Sports roadkill. If I don't go out for shot putter, do you think they'll make me run laps with the track team? I could run 1 lap or maybe 2 very slowly on a nice fall day. Frank was being optimistic. He runs about as fast and gracefully as a fully loaded garbage truck grinding up a steep hill in low gear. I heard the track team ran 10 miles a day last year, Becca told him. There was a moment of unhappy silence as we looked at each other and pondered what senior year would be like with Moldinger in charge of our school. And that was when Mr. Palakis, the night manager, hurried up behind us and started screaming, "Get to work, all of you! I don't pay you to gab! Jack, a table of 10 just left a royal mess! Skimshy, there are 2 orders of nachos getting cold! Nobody likes cold nachos! Becca, we're short-handed at the registers! Let's go! Move your butts!" I hurried over to the royal mess and started clearing up half-munched french fries and greasy bits of uneaten cheeseburger. Frank ambled up next to me, picked up a discarded onion ring, studied it as if debating whether he should pop it in his mouth, and then tossed it reluctantly into my tray of garbage and dirty dishes. "Sorry to be the bearer of bad news," he said. "I just don't get why they're doing this," I told him. "Why don't they just do their legacy thing and leave the rest of us alone? What happened to live and let live?" Ours is not to reason why," Frank answered. "Ours is just to join a team and die." He hesitated and then softly, "Jack, your father was one of the first at the board meeting to jump up to his feet and start clapping." "No surprise there," I muttered. picking up a broken ketchup bottle and turning it upside down in my tray to avoid the jagged glass edges. Frank lowered his voice even more. After the meeting broke up, I saw him talking to Moldinger. I heard him say something about you trying out for the football team. Moldinger was nodding his head. Sorry, but I thought you'd want to know. Chapter 3. And this is not really tackle, Bob Powers told us. The park was empty because of the summer heat, and as the sun dipped lower, the shadows of old oak trees reached out inch by inch across the grassy field, as if getting ready to trip us up. 12 of us had shown up for this friendly game, and now that I was here, I could tell that it would be neither friendly nor a game. So it's two-hand touch? I asked nervously. Not exactly, Rob said. We call it half-hit, which means you're trying to bring each other down, but not do any serious damage. You don't need helmets or pads for half-hit, just have fun out there. Rob had been my closest friend once upon a time, before the school's pecking order took shape. His father had played quarterback on the state championship team that my dad had captained. When they drank beers together, Rob's father still sometimes called my dad Captain. Rob and I had hung out into middle school, and then we'd gone in very different directions. I was scrawny, to use my father's phrase, but Rob had sprouted muscles, not to mention chiseled features, cat-quick reflexes, and a rifle arm. Now he was contending for the starting quarterback job, earning cash from modeling gigs, and dating a swarm of cheerleaders. He'd called me up the day before and invited me to this friendly game, and he hadn't hidden his real agenda. One of our starting receivers just tore his ACL. Coach Moldinger is looking for someone with good wheels to replace him, and your name has come up. Thanks, Rob, but I really don't think I'm varsity material, I had said. It wouldn't hurt you to try, he pointed out. We're not allowed to have team practices during the summer, but we're going to have a friendly pickup game in the park, just an informal toss and catch kind of thing. No coaches, just some of the guys. Why don't you come and give it a run and see where it leads? My dad had been in on the plan. Just try, he encouraged at the breakfast table the next day. Dad, I've got iron hands. Cover them with receiver's gloves. Do I look like a football player to you? He lowered the sports section and glanced across at me, as if evaluating me with his gray eyes. At 45, he still had the muscular body of an all-state running back whose toughness was legendary in our town. His nickname had been the Logan Express, and people who'd seen him play said that it had taken 3 or even 4 tacklers to bring him down. If a knee injury in his senior year of college hadn't ended his playing career, Dad would have turned pro. It was hard to know what he was thinking as he looked back at me, but he said, Sure. I thought I was scrawny. The point is, there's one thing nobody can teach, and that's speed. My mother had been listening to the conversation, and she gently said, Tom, if he doesn't want to do it, don't push him. I just want him to try, Ted told her. Is that such a horrible thing? So here I was, giving it a try. Rob wasn't the only varsity player who had shown up. Sprinkled in with 7 of us newbies were 5 starting members of the football team who had come, presumably, to check us out. Coach Moldinger, or perhaps I should say Principal Moldinger, wasn't there, nor were any of the other dozen or so assistant football coaches, so Rob and a guy named Barlow were running the thing. They staked out a grassy rectangle with orange cones and divided us into 2 teams, and I was put with Rob and 4 other guys I didn't know well. We huddled up around him before we kicked off. Stay loose, he told us. No pressure at all, guys. But it's still a chance to show what you've got, so if you go in for a tackle, make sure you wrap him up and bring him down. You never know who might be watching. I looked past him to the parking lot and saw a big man get out of an SUV and sit down on a bench near a duck pond that offered a good view of the field. He was too far away for me to see his face clearly, but he had the bulk of a weightlifter, and even from this distance, I could see that he had no neck. Another tall man strolled up and sat next to him. He was wearing a cap that shadowed his face, but I could tell it was my father. We lined up facing the other team, with Rob in the center holding the ball. I tried to stay calm. There was nothing to lose. I didn't even want to make the stupid football team. If I did well, it would be fine. If I screwed up, it might be even better. The June day had been sweltering, nearly 100 degrees, and even though the sun had started to sink, it was still steamy hot. I felt a sweat break out on my legs and arms and across my chest, and took a few quick breaths. Rob gave me a wink as if to remind me of Gentry's motto, just go for it. And then he took 2 steps and kicked off into the setting sun. A twisting kick so high that the ball seemed to disappear for a second in the purple clouds, soaring over the receiver's team's heads as they scrambled back to pick the football up. We raced toward them, and I found myself in the lead. I'd always been fast. This is my saving grace as a mediocre athlete. The thing that partially makes up for my scrawny build and lack of coordination. I'm not the fastest in our school. There are probably 2 or 3 sprinters on the track team who can edge me out over 50 yards, but that evening in the park, when 6 of us sprinted across the grass toward the other team, I quickly took the lead. As I raced ahead of my teammates, I wondered why I was doing this. It was almost as if a little voice was shouting, "Stop! You don't have to do this. You hate football. None of these guys are your friends, not even Rob. Don't kid yourself. You don't have to prove anything to Moldinger. He's a sports Nazi, just like Becca said. Your dad should accept who you are, or it's his problem and not yours. Slow down and let somebody else get there first." That's what the little voice said, and I heard it as I ran, but my arms were pumping and I was flying over the grass. Instead of slowing down, I sped up and quickly pulled away from my teammates. The football rolled deep into what would have been their end zone if the field had been lined, and stopped in tall grass. Barlow got to it first and could have just downed it, but he chose to pick it up and run it out, and I slanted toward him. One of their players tried to block me, and I dodged around him. Barlow saw me coming and shouted to his teammates, "Come on, you losers, block for me!" One of the losers threw a nasty block at me, and the bony point of his right elbow dug into my ribs, but then I was past them all and facing Barlow one-on-one. He was about my height, but not scrawny at all, a star running back, one of the co-captains of the varsity team, and a furious competitor in every sport known to man. I darted toward him, and he held his ground, watching me come on. The truth is, I wasn't even thinking about tackling him. I figured my job was just to contain him until my teammates arrived to help. Barlow faked right and went left, and I bought the fake for half a second and then reversed direction. My feet got tangled with each other, and as I took off after him, I tripped myself. I knew that any second I would do a face plant into the grass and look like the biggest clown since the Three Stooges stopped making movies. I fought gravity and my own clumsiness, and somehow I kept running for 3 more steps, if you can call that running. It was halfway between a sprint and a dive. I was already nearly horizontal, and my arms were windmilling for balance. And then I couldn't fight it anymore and went down hard, my chest first. But at the very last second, my arms grabbed onto something, and I held on. In my battle to stay upright, I had forgotten all about Barlow, but my 3-step dive to the grass had made up the distance to him, and my thrashing arms had wrapped around his knees. Instead of the clumsiest dryland belly flop in the history of Founders Park, I had by sheer luck executed a nearly flawless open field tackle of the football team's starting running back. We both went down hard and rolled over on the grass. I let go of his knees and lay there for a second stunned. Then Rob's excited voice crowed over me. "Way to hit, Jack! That was awesome, man! A safety on the first play of the game!" He pulled me up, and my teammates surrounded me and thumped me on the back. "Great stuff! Massive hit, Logan! You're the man!" Barlow walked over, wiping mud off his forehead. He muttered, "Good hit," and tapped me on the shoulder, but there was a sharpness to his voice, and his dark eyes didn't look particularly friendly. "Thanks," I said. "That was a safety," Rob reminded Barlow. "We get 2 points, and you guys kick off to us. Nice way to start the game, huh?" Barlow made a growling sound deep in his throat as he turned away. We lined up for their kick, and a kid named Garrett caught it and ran it back. Rob moved us up the field with 2 short and accurate passes. He pointed to me in our third huddle. 3 completes and we get a first down, he said. "It's your turn, Logan. Slant right. I'm going to count your steps. On the 5th, step stop short, turn back to me, and the ball will already be in your chest. Got it?" 5 steps, I agreed. "Got it." "It's a timing play," he said. "Can't miss." Our huddle broke, and we walked toward the line together. Don't drill it," I cautioned him softly. "I don't have the best hands." "You're playing like a beast," he whispered back. "If you get daylight after you catch it, turn on your jets. The way you're going, you get a shot at a starting job." I slid the receiver's gloves my father had bought me out of my pocket and pulled them on over my sweaty hands as I walked back to the line. Those 2 words kept tap dancing around in my head. Starting job? Who was I kidding? I wasn't a star receiver on the Fremont football team. Not me, not close, not ever. Tap, tap. But still, starting job. Playing before crowds, cheerleaders at parties. Tap, tap. I glanced at the duck pond. The 2 men on the bench hadn't budged. My father pulled out a water bottle, tilted himself a drink, and stared right at me. Garrett stood over the ball. 47, Rob called out to him. 65, 22, hut! Garrett hiked him the ball, and I slanted right. As I ran, I heard one of their players shout out, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, watch Logan! I was already on my second step with a kid named Dumont trying to cover me. He was fast, but he knew he couldn't run with me, so he gave me 3 yards of cushion off the line. I counted my steps. 3, 4, 5, and slammed on the brakes. I turned back toward Rob, and bam! The football arrived by express mail. I hadn't expected it that hard and fast, and I couldn't quite hold it. It popped up out of my iron hands, and as I tried to grab it, other hands reached for it. Dumont had closed the distance, and he tried to grab the loose ball and run it in. I managed to get both my hands on it as Dumont's momentum carried him on past. I realized that I was now alone, undefended, safely cradling the football. It was time to turn on the burners and run it in for a touchdown. Once I got going, no one on this field could catch me. I started to spin back around toward their end zone, and as I was in mid-pivot, a freight train ran me over. The next thing I knew, I was lying on my back in the grass, tasting salt and pebbles, and looking up at the purple clouds that seemed to twist and billow mysteriously like a magician's cloak during a good trick. I tried to stand up, but Rob told me, "Stay down, buddy." Oh, look at his mouth. I put my hands to my lips, and it came away crimson. I realized, to my horror, that I wasn't tasting salt and pebbles, but rather blood and my own busted teeth. Sorry, Logan, Barlow's voice said. I didn't mean to hit you that hard. As the shock of the impact wore off, the pain came on in waves. I lay flat on my back and closed my eyes and made my hands into fists. Then I heard my father say, "Stay down, Jack. There's an ambulance on the way." And then more softly, in the closest he'd ever come to a loving voice, "You did good, son. I'm proud of you." All right, so there is the first couple chapters of Losers Take All by David Klass. I love where they're going with this, because this accident makes him so angry, and not only for his father's reaction, but for the principal's reaction, that they're so proud of him for getting all busted up on the field. He has to spend a couple days in the hospital, and he's all like, "I will not do this." So then he gets together with his friends to make a third string soccer team, and but the problem is they need a coach, and so they get this crazy visiting part-time faculty person from England, his area of expertise is history. And so instead of doing practice, they have like history lessons. But then the football coach gets angry at him, and then they decide, hey, you know what? We're not going to play to have fun. The whole point of what we're going to do, if this school is so focused on winning, what we're going to do is we are going to lose, and we're going to lose on purpose. And so then then everything goes on from there, because things don't go quite the way they plan it, and they've got to constantly fight the school from shutting them down, and then things get a little out of hand at the end of it. So it ends up being really funny, really interesting about this kid who makes a team to fight back at his school, for a team that's whole goal is to lose their games. So Losers Take All by David Klass. It's amazing.